Hi everyone, I'm Dre, the host and founder of the Dragon Network, and welcome to the YouTube channel. On this channel, we talk about all things that are related to healthcare IT with hopes that we can inspire some of you and provide a little bit of information on things that are going on in our industry, as well as common topics and terms that we hear on a regular basis. So today I'd like to talk about workarounds, and in particular, why IT workarounds are often created in a healthcare environment. So before we get started on the reasons, let's take a quick look at the definition of a workaround. So if you Google workaround on the web, you're going to find a couple of different definitions. The way that I define it in a healthcare IT environment is that it is an alternative path to accomplishing a task or a series of tasks that differs from the designed and intended process. So fairly broad definition, but definitely one that we'll keep in mind as we go through some of these reasons. So we're going to go over 5 reasons in total today, and first up, we've got technical issues. So if there are issues with your application, whether it be an error message that's popping up, functionality that's not working at all, or if there are some slowness issues, some challenges navigating, or really if there's just barriers that are presenting themselves in the correct path, users will very often and incredibly quickly come up with workarounds around those technical challenges. So in this technical challenges group, the other thing that we'll include is if the EHR or the application that they're utilizing simply doesn't have the choice available to address what it is they're trying to do. So for example, if they're trying to find an area within a clinical note, or they're trying to find a spot to document particular information that's relevant, and they can't find it, so there's not a field for that, or there's not a drop down that they're trying to select, then they will very quickly utilize a free text option and find another spot to put it. So it may or may not be in the correct section, and it actually sometimes can even be in a completely separate document or a completely separate order note. So all of those we're going to include as technical issues. So the second reason that workarounds are created is if end users are not aware, or if they're a little bit unsure of how the process actually needs to work. So if they're not aware of it at all, they're going to utilize the technology in the way that seems most intuitive. And unfortunately, when it comes to EHRs, some of them aren't as intuitive as we would like, and the most intuitive path, or the most logical path it seems to take in the system, isn't actually the one that they should take. This particular workaround path can also happen if they are generally familiar with the steps that they're supposed to take, or generally familiar with the functionality, but they're not exactly sure how to do it. So in instances where there's not, a very strong and secure knowledge of what steps to take next, they're going to go ahead and guess. And that guess is going to follow intuition. And again, within the EHRs, unfortunately, it's not always going to be the path you want. Some are definitely more intuitive than others, but by and large, they're a little bit more challenging to navigate their way around if you're trying to figure out how to do something. So this becomes the source of a lot of workarounds. And this actually helps lead to our next reason, which is that the workaround was informally taught to you by a colleague. So if you have one individual that's not quite sure how to do it, or that has discovered that they need a technical workaround for something, the first thing that they're going to do if someone asks them, how do I do this, is they're going to explain the workaround that they're using. They're not going to explain it in terms of a workaround. So they're not going to say, oh, I don't know how to do it, I'm using a workaround. They're actually just going to say, oh, do it like this, or this is how I do it. And they're going to walk you through the process that they take, even if that process isn't exactly the right path. So again, if you're relying on intuition, or you're trying to work around something that's a technical issue, these workarounds tend to actually expand and snowball among other staff because they're taught to each other informally. So the fourth one is where they've discovered that there's an alternative path that makes things quicker. So in this instance, an end user might be frustrated with the amount of time that it takes to follow the correct path. If this is something that they're doing on a regular basis, what may happen is that they'll look inside the application for ways to make that path shorter. So they're not necessarily trying to overcome a technical challenge, and they're also not having to use intuition because they're not sure how to do it. They do know how to do it, they just think it's taking too long, so they're going to try to shrink it up a little bit better. So this discovery of an alternative path isn't necessarily always a bad one. We can have some very good outcomes with this, and they can in fact find more efficient ways to do everything. So the end users that typically are going to do this are ones that are a little bit more tech savvy, they're a little bit more familiar with the application overall, and they're going to start attempting different pathways. So what happens if they leave out a step? What happens if they do the steps out of order? So you do want to make sure that if you discover workarounds that are taking place in this manner, that you do investigate to make sure that everything you need to happen is still happening from an IT perspective, but you can actually have some pretty significant process improvement if the workarounds that are being created in this category actually do find more efficient paths. So kudos to end users who found some that actually work in this way. So the fifth and last reason for creating workarounds is frustration with the usability of the system. So again, in this instance, individuals are aware of what the path is supposed to be. They know the functionality that they're supposed to follow, but they're finding that functionality incredibly frustrating, incredibly difficult to use, or that it just doesn't fit in with their workflow appropriately. Instead of trying to find a more efficient path, like we did in the last category, these ones are actually often going to leave the application to try to figure out how to accomplish things in a different way altogether. So they're not going to look for the shortcuts within the system and really look to make those hands-on keyboard actions more efficient. What they're going to look for is, how do I get from point A to point B more efficient? So one of the more common workarounds that we see in this area is texting. So texting in a healthcare space needs to be secure, obviously, with everything that we do. And some of the secure texting and the secure messaging that's in place inside of our EHRs and inside of our approved systems can be quite cumbersome and quite frustrating for users who are very used to texting all of their friends and all of their family on a regular basis. When they find the usability of the system to be challenging, sometimes workarounds can be created where they go outside and try a different path. So those are 5 common reasons that individuals create workarounds in a healthcare IT environment. It is very important to note that workarounds are almost always created with the best intentions in mind. Very, very rarely is anyone actually trying to circumvent what is in place and the process that's been defined. They're just trying to care for their patients in the best and most efficient way that they can to get the best outcomes that they can. So it isn't something that you want to immediately punish. Workarounds are something that you can gain a lot of information from. And I do have another video on how to evaluate a workaround once you've discovered it, to see if that workaround is something that is unfavorable that you need to address, or if it's something that's favorable that you need to actually look at incorporating into your overall IT world. With that said, I'll wrap things up for this week. I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you've learned a little bit something new. If you like what you see, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you again soon.